Welcome to another edition of HSF Conversations. I'm Matt Bracey, and this is Philip Morgan. And we are here to discuss the Silmarillion. Some time ago, we had a conversation about the Silmarillion, and we did not spend a ton of time talking about actual episodes in the Silmarillion. We rather talked about the idea of the Silmarillion. And we had said at the time that we would come back together and have a conversation about some of the actual episodes within the book. I want to make a few caveats before we jump in. Number one, if you have not read the Silmarillion and you want to read it for yourself and you want to be surprised at the things that you're reading, in other words, if you don't want any spoilers, you might not listen to the rest of this conversation because we're going to be discussing certain plot points along as it fits the things that we're wanting to tease out, number one. Number two, the scope of the Silmarillion, there's no possible way for us to discuss meaningfully, or for that matter, unmeaningfully, each and every theme worth discussing and character worth discussing in this book. It is hugely in its scope. It's vast in its scope. So what we have elected to do is we've picked a handful of quotations, a handful of scenes, and we're going to read through them and we're going to tease them out and just talk through some of the themes that are in these scenes. So that is the plan for this conversation. Did you have any caveats you wanted to add before we jumped in?
I don't suppose, if you are really unfamiliar with the book, at least I've planned to try to give a brief synopsis of certain narratives and points to make sense of the quote that we're going to deal with, or the idea that Tolkien's trying to get across. I don't claim to have, it's a very complex book to try to summarize and to get your head all the way around. So I'm going to try to summarize those as best I can and as accurately as possible. But anyway, for those that are also deep Tolkien scholars, or as we call each other, nerds, then, recognize there's a little bit of leeway in how we summarize all this. But anyway.
Well, do you want to? What we'll do is we'll go back and forth, and if you'd like to pick the first passage,
Okay.
then I give it to you.
I'm going to go through mine kind of chronologically through the book. The first quote that I have comes fairly early on in the section that actually is titled the Quinta Silmarillion. So the Silmarillion is a collection of stories that Tolkien wrote, many of which are related to a particular narrative plot point about a set of jewels that were created by one of the most powerful of the elves ever to be created. His name was Fëanor. But he crafts these jewels with the assistance of the satanic character in this work named Melkor, where he also goes by Morgoth. And in the development,
he's the big bad.
Yes, the satanic character.
Yes,
yes, that's right. Fëanor, after having crafted the Silmarils, as they're called, those are jewels, the Silmarils, they are stolen by Morgoth and his minions, and in the process, they also destroy much of the beauty that had been made in the world, and especially in the place where the gods live, kind of a correlation to maybe Mount Olympus, but they're angelic beings rather than gods. There's one great god who serves over them, named Eru or Illúvatar. So all that to say is the setup for what happens when the jewels are stolen. The Valar, these angelic beings, these godlike beings, they ask Fëanor to give them the Silmarils so that they might restore some of the beauty that had been lost. What they don't know is that the moment of their asking, Morgoth has snuck in and has stolen the Silmarils. So the reason that's an important thing to note is One of the most fascinating aspects of Tolkien's work, especially in the Silmarillion, is the way in which uh, uh, the long-running elements of fate interplay with free will. And so I want to use this as a jumping off point for that. But when they go to ask Fëanor what he should do, Tolkien says the Silmarils had passed away, referring to that Morgoth had stolen them, although they didn't know that yet. The Silmarils had passed away, and all one it may seem whether Fëanor had said yea or nay to Yavanna's request, this Valar's request to give the Silmarils up. Yet had he said yea at the first, before the tidings came from Formanos about the theft of the Silmarils, it may be that his after deeds would have been other than they were. But now the doom of the Noldor, or the elves, drew near. So in that idea, he says that when they request this of Fëanor, he had the option to either work with them and help or to turn them away. And, you know, in hindsight, he couldn't have given them anyway. But the fact that his response sets the stage for what's going to happen later. His decisions in one moment set the trajectory for what's going to come after that. And so you pair that quote with his actual response to this when they ask for these things, and Fëanor decides that he's going to go on his own and to take these Silmarils back by force from Morgoth. This also leads into this idea of setting the path for the future. So then Fëanor swore a terrible oath. His 7 sons leapt straightway to his side and took the selfsame vow together, and red as blood shone their drawn swords in the glare of the torches. They swore an oath which none shall break, and none should take, by the name even of Illúvatar, that would be God in this world, calling the everlasting dark upon them if they kept it not. And Manwë they named in witness, and Varda in the hallowed mountain of Tanaquetil, vowing to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world Vala, demon, elf, or man as yet unborn, or any creature, great or small, good or evil, that time should bring forth unto the end of days, whoso should hold to take or keep a Silmaril from their possession. And then Tolkien says, for so sworn, good or evil, an oath may not be broken, and it shall pursue oath keeper and oath breaker to the world's end. One of the things that I love about the Silmarillion, but I think as we noted last time, what makes it challenging is it doesn't read like a normal book. And part of the reason it doesn't read like a normal book, I've come to conclude, is that it is in some sense a classical tragedy. Edith Hamilton, who is a scholar of Greco-Roman culture, writing in the 1930s, said there are 4 great tragedians in the world, 3 of which are Greek: Aeschylus, the father of tragedy, Sophocles, and Euripides, and the 4th is Shakespeare. But one of the things that she notes is that tragedies are distinct from modern literature in that modern literature is consumed with the individual psychologizing of the person. It's an inward dialogue that's constantly available to us. And Shakespeare does a little bit of that, whereas the Greeks do none of it. Tolkien, it struck me, is doing this same sort of tragic writing, which is the scope of the narrative is the exterior of the person. And what we're perceiving is how actions and deeds and words compile. They are building on top of one another. And as they begin to accumulate, they begin to shape the opportunities and possibilities of the future. So every action that we take is in response to these channels that are formed by decisions, words, oaths that are taken generations or thousands of years before shape the way that we can even perceive the world today. And so I find that a very helpful way of understanding. The modern concept is good. So all of our films are in many ways about this deep psychologizing and thinking about the inward dialogue, and that has its good element. But it's very helpful for us to look at this from this other lens as well, which is to say all of our actions are taken within a framework that we don't determine, that is given to us, and we have to make our decisions. but also don't take those decisions lightly. This brings me back to Jesus' statement that we'll be held accountable for every passing word. Jesus sees every passing word as having infinite power and consequences. They don't always appear to us. They're not always obvious. If you take a formal oath like Fëanor does, that can seem obvious. But later on in the book, we find people saying things they think they're all by themselves and they don't know they're overheard. And then it has consequences for whole kingdoms. So I think that that's a very helpful thing and one of the most instructive things for me and what makes this unique rather than just like any other modern book.
You've touched on some of the themes that are going to come out of some of the quotations that I've chosen. You mentioned the deep tragedy of the Silmarillion. I wouldn't push this analogy too far, but there's an extent to which the Silmarillion is very Old Testament, whereas, say, Lord of the Rings is very New Testament. There's some hope in the Silmarillion, but there's a lot of tragedy, a lot of tragedy. But the Silmarillion invariably sets up the context within which the hope that is ultimately the return of the king in the Lord of the Rings, it sets up that context in which that story can thrive. But over and over and over, you get to know characters and you love them and you feel for them. And then they make terrible decisions and you go, no, why are you doing that? And then you see the consequences of those decisions over the course of not simply years, but decades and even centuries
And generations.
and generations. So, not unlike how the decision of Adam casts a long shadow over all who follow Adam, the decision of Fëanor casts a very long shadow over everyone who follows.
It sets up the rest of the Quintus Silmarillion, and most of the book is an outworking of his decision whether or not to respond to the request of the gods positively or negatively. He responds negatively, says no. When he finds out the Silmarillions have been stolen, now he's already set on a trajectory of taking an oath to commit himself and all of his descendants to regaining them at the cost of, if they don't do it, they'll be condemned to the outer darkness or hell. And he says that's an oath no one should ever take because those oaths will follow you. That they're not, Proverbs says that a curse lightly sworn is like a bird's, that flits and goes off. But it doesn't say anything about serious oaths. Serious oaths that are taken in earnest, they have consequences. And those consequences may very well extend beyond yourself to whole groups of people and your descendants.
The tongue is a small thing, but it's more powerful than the rudder of a ship.
Yeah.
Our words matter. And in a day and age where we want our words we say one thing and then we change our mind a minute later and we want to act as if there's no consequence to that. Tolkien gives us a realism.
Yeah.
He also reminds us that, and you've pointed this out, but our past matters because it has invariably set the context within which we operate, good or bad. And the history that we're making by the decisions we're making also is going to have consequences after us, whether we realize it, whether we like it or not. A very small stream over a vast plain can become a mighty river,
right?
Doing great good or great harm.
Yeah. And so what I find helpful here is what Tolkien is working through in his narrative. He never discusses this in like detail or explicitly, but what he's trying to get at is the relationship of individual volition and fate, for lack of a better term. And there's been a long running debate since as early as we have debates. Is the world determined? Is everything set? Or are we able to make our own way in the world? And there have been people who fall radically on either end of those things. Tolkien argues that both of those things are at work in the world, that it's not fully deterministic, but that there are deep and abiding structures that are shaping and guiding our options and choices. But within those realms, we can make some choices, and our interaction with those then sets up later uh, structures and channels. So anyway, and we can move on from there. But that was I find that one of the most fascinating elements of this that struck me early on when I first read Tolkien. Even though I couldn't really put words behind it, there was something about that that was very fascinating to me.
Well, thank you for sharing. For my first, I'd like to focus on the character Ungoliant. Ungoliant is this great wicked spider. She is the mother of later the spiders of Mirkwood and Shelob and other dark, evil creatures. I'd like to read a few passages about her and reflect on a theme there. First of all, and she also teams up with Morgoth for a time, and Morgoth, of course, steals the Silmarils, and that's going to come into her story as well. This passage here is a bit about her beginning, or our knowledge of her beginning. There, beneath the sheer walls of the mountains and the cold, dark sea, the shadows were deepest and thickest in the world. And there in Avathar, secret and unknown, Ungoliant had made her abode, so she's in the dark, secret shadows of the world. The Eldar, the elves, knew not whence she came, but some have said that in ages long ago, before she descended from the darkness that lies about Arda, when Melkor first looked down in envy upon the kingdom of Manwë, and that in the beginning she was one of those that he corrupted to his service. So the rumor is that she was corrupted by Melkor. However, the theme I want to tease out is the theme of the lust, and the insatiable lust of wickedness. So Melkor, for all intents and purposes, is going to create this monster. But this monster, as we're going to see, is going to become more than even he can handle. But she had disowned her master, desiring to be mistress of her own lust, taking all things to herself to feed her emptiness. So this is her introduction. She hungered for light and she hated it. So this is her introduction. Moving along, there's a scene. So you have the two trees of light. And here's what the text says. In that very hour, Melkor and Ungoliant came hastening over the fields of Valinor. As the shadow of a black cloud upon the wind fleets up over the sunlit earth, and they came before the green mound. Then the unlight of Ungoliant rose up, even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang upon the mound, and with his black spear he smote each tree to its core, wounded them deep, and their sap poured forth as it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. So this is a deeply tragic time. This is like pure wickedness partaking of the fruit of the tree of life or something. It's these are very holy, pure things, and darkness, unlight is eating of it. And here's what it says, the text. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree, she set her black beak to their wounds till they were drained. And the poison of death that was in her went into their tissues and withered them root and branch and leaf, and they died. So she has sucked up all the light that is in these trees. These trees, it's the light of these trees that made the Silmarils, to connect some narrative points. And still she thirsted. And still she thirsted. And going to the wells of Varda, she drank them dry. But Ungoliant belched forth black vapors as she drank, and she swelled to a shape so vast and hideous that Melkor was afraid. And then one more passage. They steal the Silmarils, Ungoliant and Melkor. They flee, and Ungoliant is still not satisfied. Morgoth says, Melkor Morgoth, dost thou desire all the world for thy belly? I did not vow to give thee that. I am its lord. Not so much, said Ungoliant, but thou hast a great treasure. From Formanos I will have all that. Yea, with both hands thou shalt give it. So she wants the Silmarils for herself, but he'll not give it up. He'll not give it up. He cries. People come to his minions, to use your term, come to his aid. She flees, and here's where I want to end. She flees to what's called the Valley of Dreadful Death. And the text reads, for other foul creatures of spider form had dwelt there since the days of the delving of Angband, where Morgoth resides. And she mated with them, and she devoured them. And even after Ungoliant herself departed, and went whither she would into the forgotten south of the world, her offspring abode there, and wove their hideous webs. And so that's a reference to later, the spiders of Mirkwood. Shelob, others. Of the fate of Ungoliant, no tell tales. Yet some have said that she ended long ago, when in her uttermost famine she devoured herself. At last, she devoured herself. What I find interesting about this theme, evil will be unsatisfied. It wants, and it wants, and it takes, and it takes, and then it receives, and it's still not satisfied. And it's deep lust for that which is good that it turns, and it's deep lust for that which is bad. It's unending. And one is a very serious look into the theme of wickedness. Two, as we read about the theme of wickedness throughout this book, it's a call for people to rise up and to face the darkness, to face the wickedness. As we trace this theme even into Lord of the Rings, it's a call not simply to be content in your hobbit hole, but to go out into the world and to have courage and to fight the great powers of darkness. Because the great powers of darkness, they will not be satisfied. They will not be satisfied.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. And the other thing that becomes apparent through this relationship between Morgoth and Ungoliant is the divisiveness of the wicked. That there is infighting going on, vying for lordship and mastery, and that's Satan believes that he has control of things. This is the Melkor character, Morgoth character. He believes he's going to step lordship, but he doesn't realize that he also has these others that are all contending for the same thing as well. And so they are less monolithic than they appear to be from the outside looking in. And
wickedness is lonely.
Yeah, that's the other aspect. There's radical isolation throughout the book for the wicked, and for those who commit themselves to wickedness.
The first time I came across the passage where Ungoliant sucks dry the light from the two trees of Valinor, this symbol of perfection, I found it kind of disturbing and deeply sad, because it's this great and holy and sacred thing that has been twisted and turned. And for me, it's a reminder, there are people in our world today, sometimes it's just easier to let wickedness be wicked. You stay over there, let me do my thing over here. I don't want to get involved with it. But if Tolkien is right, and I think that he is, that's not going to work because wickedness, it's not going to be content with what it has. If you give it a little room, if you give it an inch, it's going to take a foot.
Mhm.
And if you give it a foot, it's going to take a yard. And if you give it a yard, it's just going to keep wanting more and more and more, and it's never going to be satisfied. That's why Bilbo couldn't just stay in his hobbit hole. He could let Sauron do his thing, but eventually Sauron was going to come to his doorstep.
Well,
We
let's
can't
come.
just let wickedness do its thing.
Yeah.
We have to fight it in
Yeah.
a manner of speaking.
Let's come back to that in a minute because I have a quote that deals with these things as well. But before we get to that, and while we're on this topic, in fact, we might could have started with that. It's Ungoliant's destruction of the trees with Morgoth that sparks off Fëanor being requested to give up the Silmarils to help all this. So his oath is now set in place. But in that same moment where Fëanor is interacting with the gods, they're requesting his assistance. He denies the assistance. It turns out the Silmarils are stolen. He makes a horrible oath. And then the gods themselves give a doom. They give a judgment against what he is setting in motion. And they send a warning messenger to him to tell him that he is now going to be exiled from the Holy Land, this holy place, this island where the gods reside, and that his oath and his decisions are going to have horrible consequences. And Fëanor's response, I think, is very interesting. So Manwë is this angelic godlike being who sends the judgment. Manwë saying, "Against the folly of Fëanor shall be set my counsel only. Go not forth, for the hour is evil, and your road leads to sorrow that you do not foresee. No aid will the Valar, these godlike beings, no aid will the Valar lend you in this quest, but neither will they hinder you. For this ye shall know, as ye came hither freely, freely shall ye depart. But thou, Fëanor, Finwë's son, by thine oath art exiled. The lies of Melkor thou shalt unlearn in bitterness. Vala he is, thou sayest. Then thou hast sworn in vain, for none of the Valar canst thou overcome now or ever within the halls of Ea, or this reality, this world. Not though Eru, or God, whom thou namest, had made thee thrice greater than thou art." So Manwë's judgment is, you're exiled because of your actions, but I'm telling you, you should repent of them now. If you don't repent of them, you're going to find out all the lies of this satanic character as you try to pursue him and to take the Silmarils back by force. You're going to find out how bad this is going to turn out for you. And he says, you recognize that he is a different being than you. You do not assume that you can overtake these powers in the world. So the Valar are both angelic beings, but they're also kind of the natural laws of the world that Tolkien has created. They are the natural laws of the universe. They govern over, the sea and the land and the plants and all these things. He says you can't assail these on your own. Fëanor's response, he says, then turning to the herald, Fëanor cried, "Say this to Manwë Sulimo, High King of Arda. If Fëanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him, and sits not idle in grief. And it may be that Eru has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt at the least will I do to the foe of the Valar, that even the mighty in the ring of doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end they shall follow me. Farewell." And so Fëanor, this is his parting statement to the Valar before he leaves to go back to what will be Middle Earth. And his statement reflects a pride and an arrogance that is very characteristic of the modern age, which Tolkien was very much aware of. Lewis was very much aware of. It's the same thing that Lewis is dealing with in that hideous strength, which is the impatience with the working out of God's timing to address brokenness in the world, imperfections in the world, and a arrogance in believing that through our own might we could assail the powers of the universe and set up a more well-ordered world, and a thumbing our nose at the patience of God and the timing of God, and setting ourselves up as the rulers. And what we find, Fëanor's story is the fundamental tragedy of this narrative, but it has consequences for everyone. And he is setting this up because of his rejection of the timing of God, of the means by which God proceeds to enact justice, and instead taking it all upon himself and saying, even if I fail, you're all going to be amazed at, that maybe I have more power than you think I do. It's a way of seeing the world that's rooted in pride and in a lack of recognition of the actual power that you have in relationship to God's power and what he's created in the world. So for me, at least, that's a good way for us to think about the dangers of the pride of the modernist position, that we can be the masters of our fates. We can be the masters of the universe. And there are injustices in the world, and horrible injustices. And there are means by which to address them. But we shouldn't put ourselves in the place of God and being able to think that we could reconcile all these things. Anyway, I find that a very helpful and meaningful theme throughout this book.
That's good. That's good. Got nothing to add. I picked the character Ungoliant before. I'd like to reflect on the character of Felagund. Felagund is an elf. He is in the story of Beren and Luthien. Felagund is the king of a great city kingdom called Nargothrond. He is its king. He has previously swore an oath to a character named Barahir. Barahir saved his life. Barahir is a man. Barahir has saved his life, and Felagund has sworn an oath that he would serve him or his offspring forever. It's not unlike the covenant David makes with Jonathan. All right, so the son of Barahir is Beren. Beren wants the hand of the character Luthien. He goes to her father, Thingol, who says, I need you to go get me a Silmaril. So, through a course of events that I'll not summarize, Beren, on quest for this Silmaril, which Morgoth has, winds up in Nargothrond. And so that's the context of where I'm going to begin this discussion. Thus Beren came before King Finrod Felagund in Nargothrond. And Felagund knew him, needing no ring to remind him of the kin of Beor and of Barahir. And so Beren tells Felagund why he's there. King Felagund spoke before his people, recalling the deeds of Barahir and his vow. And he declared that it was laid upon him to aid the son of Barahir in his need. And he sought the help of his chieftains. Within the kingdom of Nargothrond are sons of Fëanor. And remember the oath that Fëanor gave. And part of the oath that he gave about the Silmarils was the Silmarils belong to us, and anyone who dares go for the Silmarils are by definition my enemy. Felagund has made a vow to help Beren. Within his kingdom are these sons of Fëanor. If he keeps his vow to Barahir, he's going to make himself the enemy of the sons of Fëanor. But he's supposed to be the leaders of these sons of Fëanor, Celegorm and Curufin. So what is he to do? He's between the rock and a hard place. Well, what he does is to keep his word to Barahir. He said he would do the thing. And Felagund, seeing that he was forsaken, took from his head the silver crown of Nargothrond and cast it at his feet, saying, "Your oaths of faith to me you may break." Because they're supposed to be faithful to their king while he's away. But instead they're going to make him their enemy, and they're going to usurp the throne. But I must hold my bond. Then Felagund gave the crown of Nargothrond to his brother, Orodreth, to govern in his stead. And Celegorm and Curufin said nothing, but they smiled and went from their holes. So Felagund goes with Beren, and eventually they are captured by Sauron, who is a chieftain of Morgoth. In the pits of Sauron, Beren and Felagund lay, and their companions were now dead. But Sauron purposed to keep Felagund to the last, for he perceived that he was a Noldo of great might and wisdom, and he deemed that in him lay the secret of their errand. He's trying to discover, why are they doing this? Why are they here? But when the wolf came for Beren, Felagund put forth all his power and burst his bonds and wrestled with the werewolf and slew it with his hands and teeth. Yet he himself was wounded to the death. Then he spoke to Beren, saying, "I go now to my long rest in the timeless halls beyond the seas and the mountains of Aman. It will be long ere I am seen among the Noldor again. And it may be that we shall not meet a second time in death or life, for the fates of our kindreds are apart. Farewell." He died then in the dark, in Tol in Agaroth, whose great tower he himself had built. Thus King Finrod Felagund, fairest and most beloved of the house of Finwë, redeemed his oath, but Beren mourned beside him in despair. And then in terms of his legacy, it says that he was the fairest of all the princes of the elves, that he remained inviolate. I find his story tragic. A great kingdom is given up. But I also find him as a character very admirable. He made a promise to a guy who saved his life. And he gives up his crown, his kingship. He gives up the kingdom. And in the end, he gives up his life in obedience to keeping his vow, to keeping his oath. And so you've got problematic elves like Fëanor, and you have very praiseworthy elves like Finrod Felagund. And I find his ability to keep his word, his resolve to keep his word, even though it costs him everything, the world, in a manner of speaking, to be very admirable.
Yeah, and that comes back to the idea of tragedy in that technical sense is the individual action in relationship to these structures that are beyond your control. So he comes into the friction between his competing oaths and how does he make his decisions. And he's broken either way but by keeping his virtue, he then, this is where again, this is excellent writing. In him giving himself up, dying in darkness, and it seems having, by the standards of success, failed. He's been virtuous, but he's lost everything. But he then sets in motion the path by which Morgoth can be overthrown.
That's right.
So his righteous keeping of oath, of a good oath, works to the undoing of Fëanor's wickedness, or the healing of it would be better, I guess to say. The healing of the brokenness that comes from that.
You brought up the scene with Fëanor, and there was the moment of decision, and it was really a moment for the future of his soul.
Mm-hmm.
And he chose poorly. And we have a moment of decision here.
Yeah.
And you know, and of course he chooses rightly, and it costs him everything. And it's a reminder that some moments may seem insignificant in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but they're deeply significant.
That's right. That's right.
I've been thinking about your last passage as well that you read, and like, what do you say to the theme? Modern man wants to presume that he can rule the world. And in a way, it relates to several themes you're talking about what the Valar represent in terms of the laws of the world. Really, these reflections, it's a reminder that we have to be realists. We have to be realists. We have to know what the real world is and the laws of the real world. And then we have to choose whether we're going to submit to the world that is, which is fundamentally realist, or are we going to presume to force the world to conform to our own imaginings, which is a sort of idealism of a wrong sort. But in so doing, if we choose that option, see, the world's not actually going to change, even if we presume that it will. And it spells trouble for us, and it spells trouble for those around us.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads me into my next selection, which is a large theme.
We'll do one more cycle of these. You do yours.
Yeah, and then I have a couple of small things that would only take a second for me to wrap up after this, but so I'll try to be brief with this. But the major section of the Silmarillion, there is a almost like a side narrative that goes on that's constantly interwoven, but it's a very important theme for our day as well, and that is the kingdom of Turgon. Turgon is an elvish ruler and leader. He becomes he's very friendly with a particular god, a good god of the waters, and Turgon becomes despondent about the nature of the days, of the time, the situation in the world. He becomes convinced that the satanic power Morgoth is going to pretty well dominate. He sees all of the inner divisions within the other elven lords and the weaknesses of man, and he becomes an isolationist, for lack of a better term. So he makes an agreement with this god. He finds a secret hidden veil up in the very tops of a mountain range that's hidden away. No one knows where it's at. It's inaccessible. He and the god work together for them to have a way for him to lead all of his people into this city called Gondolin. And they build an incredible city, but it's completely cut off from the world. The entrance is hidden by the god through his powers. And Turgon sets a law that no one can leave or enter. You can enter, but you can't leave alive, because he wants to keep his place hidden so that they can survive all the dangers of the world. And so after having set this city up, he's still getting news from the outside world, and he hears about all of the sons of Fëanor and the other elf kings who have tried to set a siege against Morgoth's kingdom in Angband, and that doesn't go well. And so when he hears the news about what's going on, this is his response. This comes from that. It says, now when Turgon learned of the breaking of the leaguer of Angband, he would not suffer any of his own people to issue forth to war. For he deemed that Gondolin was strong, and the time not yet ripe for its revealing. But he believed also that the ending of the siege was the beginning of the downfall of the Noldor, unless aid should come. And he sent companies of the Gondolordrum in secret to the mouths of Sirion and the Isle of Balar. There they built ships and set sail into the uttermost west upon Turgon's errand, seeking for Valinor, to ask for pardon for the wickedness of Fëanor and all of his followers, and to request ask pardon and aid of the Valar. And they besought the birds of the sea to guide them. But the seas were wild and wide, and shadow and enchantment lay upon them, and Valinor was hidden. Therefore, none of the messengers of Turgon came into the west, and many were lost, and few returned. But the doom of Gondolin drew nearer. One of the things that I find very fascinating for Tolkien, who lived through World War I and World War II, and had seen all of that destruction and the fumbling of politicians and the fumbling of political factions in Britain and in the West more generally, is that he pairs the isolationist, well, let's say his description of the isolationist position is a pride in their own strength, believing that they can hide away and allow the affairs of the world to go on. And even though they see that the affairs of the world, in this case, if the elves don't receive help, they're going to be destroyed. Turgon, instead of putting his own life at risk and putting his own kingdom at risk in order to fight that which was wicked, decides that he's going to continue to hide. He's not going to provide any assistance. But instead, he's going to send messengers to try to get back to the island of the Valinor in the west, after they've been exiled. And part of the exile was, you're not going to be able to come back. We are going to be at work in the world, but you can't come and look to us to fix your problems. You guys have to also deal out your own work, your own situation. So he sends messengers to the gods. None of them get there. The gods are not going to come to save the day. And it seems to me that part of what is going on there, that is part of what happens with the isolationist position when we're thinking in geopolitics, is unless the enemy is literally on our doorstep, it's not our responsibility. And we have nothing to do with it. And we can tell that things are going bad, but you know what? As long as it's not on our doorstep, we're not going to put ourselves at risk. And the more pious element of it is, we're going to let God take care of all this stuff. Whereas God is at work in the world, but he also expects us to be participants in that. And we're foolish to think we can just offload all those solutions to him. It's like the person who prays for God to provide for all of their needs, but they don't ever go out and get a job. It's the same sort of mentality. And Tolkien shows that the end of that is very bad. Gondolin, he ends that with saying Gondolin's doom was drawing nigh. You can only hold that position for so long. And eventually, those that really hold to that position, they wait so long that there's no one to help them in the end. And they're left alone to deal with the wicked. And that's what happens in this story. And the gods enter in at the very last moment, but Gondolin's destroyed in the process. And all of Turgon's hopes are destroyed and eradicated. Anyway, that had struck me in this last round as we were going through this, that idea, which is there very clearly with Tolkien.
Yeah, you see this theme prop up again and again.
Yeah, and it's in the Fellowship of the Ring and the Lord of the Rings, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But it's on a grant. So there's two ways of thinking of that isolationism. One is the geopolitical kind of constantly thinking about, I'm just going to keep ourselves protected, isolated. Then there's the Hobbit version, which is just kind of lazy comfort. Those are two different versions that land in the same place. And but both are temptations that people struggle with.
The lesson is, realism forces you to recognize that we're living in a real world, and the real world is wicked. There's horrible monsters in it. There's Morgoths and Ungoliants and Saurons. And so being a human, being a creature, uh, is not for the faint of heart. It's a rough world out there. Um, but we have to demonstrate courage, and we have to show our strength of character. We have to do that which is hard sometimes and unpleasant.
Yeah.
And being a person of integrity in this way, to Felagund, to the point of the character of Felagund, it may cost you all the glory of the world, and it may cost you your very life. But, if there's one theme, if there's one, let's say one of the primary themes through the history of ethics, that you see it in the ancient Greeks, you see it in Christians throughout history, more important than personal glory, personal riches, personal pleasure, is being a person of virtue, being a person that you can live with yourself, being a person of integrity, not being a coward.
Yeah, and this is where Francis Schaeffer says this is where the West has really become self-destructive in the postmodern 20th century world. Is we value personal peace and affluence over all other things.
There are worse things. There are worse things than dying for a good cause.
Yeah, it's true.
All right. Well, why don't you say you had a few small things?
I just have two things that I'll mention. If we had longer, I might give them more, but there is a very interesting character narrative of the generations of one man's family. His name is Huron. He is virtuous. He goes to war against Morgoth. He's entrapped and held in bondage by Morgoth for years. And while he's held in bondage, his family is destroyed by Morgoth for a variety of ways. It's got an Oedipal sort of story narrative to it, where things outside of people's control lead them into really horrific situations.
His son is Turin.
Yes, his son is Turin. When Huron is finally released by Morgoth, his wife is still alive, but just barely. She's riven by grief. His son and his daughter are dead because they were separated, didn't know each other through wicked actions of other people. They were hidden their identities from each other. They marry. Then it's revealed, this is the Oedipal part, it's revealed who they've actually married. And so when Huron is released, all of his life has been destroyed, but he's been receiving bits of news about all of this all along from Morgoth. And when he confronts the people who are supposed to be protecting his family, he receives this interesting rebuke from Melian, who is kind of a angelic figure in some ways. She's not just an elf, but she says to him, Morgoth hath bewitched thee, for he that seeth through Morgoth's eyes, willing or unwilling, seeth all things crooked. And I love that idea as well that Tolkien is getting at here is we have to be super careful about the way in which we receive news. Satan is constantly at work. That is not he is actively at work in the world, and he is constantly trying to bend the truth in all sorts of ways, because if the news comes to us crookedly, we then act in ways that we wouldn't have before. And so there's this narrative of being very careful. And if someone is particularly shown themselves to be a purveyor of crooked truth, crooked news, of not lies outright, but transformations or adaptations or just bending of the truth, that person can't be trusted. We can't act rightly and truly in the world because of that. And then
can I offer feedback to that theme?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've given this some degree of thought as disciples of the one who says he is the truth. We are concerned about truth. One of the things I've been thinking about recently is, in observing other people become outraged at news they hear, I want us to think about taking a step back because knowledge is justified or warranted true belief. So not, propositional knowledge is believing something that is true and you have good reason to believe that thing. But But if you tell me a story, a news story that creates outrage in me, but I have no way to verify that what you're saying is true, or I may think that you're a bad actor, or what you're saying represents an assertion or whatever, you might argue that it's unethical for me to become outraged because fundamentally, it's wrong for me to become outraged at something that is not true, or that is half false, or that tells only one side of the story. So it's almost like whenever I hear news. So whether Corin is hearing news from Morgoth, or we're hearing news from whatever, and or whomever, and that sounds really bad. It's almost like I have to have the self-discipline to say, well, wait a second. I'd really love to hear what the other side of this story has to say, because fundamentally I have to be interested in truth.
Mhm.
And just because somebody says it, just because somebody asserts it, and maybe even if someone says it, asserts it, and provides some level of evidence, doesn't mean that degree of evidence is properly presented.
Right.
I have to do my due diligence to ensure that I'm getting emotionally distraught over things that have basis in truth, not some manifestation of, to use that phrase, seeing the world crookedly.
Yeah, that's right. And I think for us, that what that stuck out to me this time particularly was we went through this recent political shift in the last presidential election. We did our podcast in relation to it. One of the things that was very important is this kind of rise of the rebel media, the online media space. And what drew so many people to them were those people pointing out the lies of mainstream media. And it was a place where you could see that distinction. But what ended up happening to a lot of the people that we know, young people and older people alike, was they then just began to listen to the rebel media as though they were the gospel speakers.
And it's still happening.
And you have the same problems amongst rebel media folks, these online media folks, which is to say they're just as prone to speak lies as anyone else. You have to do the hard work of analyzing and doing the research. You can't just say, "Oh, good, I found the truth tellers. I don't have to dig any deeper." And I think that's part of what we get there. Well, and last thing I'll just say, this is kind of my upward kind of encouraging note. Much of the book is very sad. It's got a deep melancholy to it. However, as things are kind of being brought to an end, one of the things that is very fascinating is that the satanic character Morgoth doesn't perceive his end coming upon him. And Tolkien says it is because the pitiless, to him that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange and beyond reckoning. One of the things that Satan cannot perceive is when people act in a virtuous way. He cannot reckon around that. He can't foresee those things because he can't himself do those things.
Mm.
And that, it seems to me, is a very comforting note. When it feels like all of the systems of the world are arrayed against us, the wicked are in ascendancy, it's easy to become very discouraged and to think, well, what's the use? We can't overcome this. The powers that be are against us. One of the things that Tolkien points out is they aren't omniscient, and they certainly can't understand the acts of virtue, the acts of sacrificial compassion and pity and care and love for a neighbor as yourself. That they can't understand. So that's always the path by which victory is achieved. Jesus' giving himself up on the cross is an act of pity and of sacrificial love that Satan can't comprehend. So he thinks it's a moment of victory, even as it turns out it's the moment of defeat, as he can't perceive that as evidence.
I'm reminded of the statement from Mithrandir to Frodo that it was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand, and that pity uh, may play an important role in the end of all of this, and that was certainly true.
Yeah.
Well, I'll end on a similar positive note. I'll be quick here. For this, I'm going to go actually to the front of the work. It's a fairly familiar passage to those who are even cursorily familiar with this work. The god character, Eru Illúvatar, has created the Valar, and the Valar have created a song. And Melkor, the Lucifer type character, has woven discord into the song. And the song is an analogy for history. And so there's that idea, to your point, of fate or foreknowledge alongside we're going to see human will. But anyway, here's the two themes, the two statements I really want to bring out. But then Ilúvatar spoke and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, a type of Valar, and mightiest among them is Melkor. But that he may know, and that all the Ainur, that I am Ilúvatar, those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, and ye may see what ye have done." So let me stop there. To the extent that the other Valar did not realize what Melkor had done, they were going to see good and well what Melkor had done. So wickedness, light will shine in the darkness, and it will be exposed for what it is. So that which we do in secret, it's going to be made known. "And thou, Melkor, thou shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." And then I'm going to skip down. Ilúvatar said again, "Behold your music. This is your minstrelsy. And each of you shall find contained herein, amid the design that I set before you, all those things which it may seem that he himself devised or added. And thou, Melkor, thou wilt discover all the secret thoughts of thy mind, and wilt perceive that they are but a part of the whole and tributary to its glory." This is a reminder that whatever the tragedy, whatever the darkness, whatever the mess of our world, the making of poor oaths, the insistence of not being involved in the affairs of the world, and the tragedy that sets, whatever the case may be, in the end, God will make all things right. In the end, God will make all things right. It may be far after, probably it will be far after we've ceased to live in this world, in this state. But in the end, God will make all things right. Even those things that other people thought they were, even wickedness. God is so great that he can even cause, he can unbend wickedness to make it into something that its makers could not have conceived. The cross is an ugly, terrible thing, and God can take that and make it into something beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, God's providentially working all of our wickednesses, small and large, into something glorious and beautiful in the end, whether we will it or not.
Whether we will it or not. And so we remember that beyond the small details of our world is one who's managing all this.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, thank you for the discussion. You have anything to say to conclude?
No, I don't think so. There's a lot more there. There are many other things. You'll notice that we didn't touch on any of the things that lead up into the Lord of the Rings. As I went through it again, I was reminded this is also a fascinating structural element for Tolkien. The Lord of the Rings was important, but it was kind of the last grace note on a much longer song.
Mm.
And so what seems so dominating from Lord of the Rings perspective in the grand scope of things is just kind of the last playing out of some much bigger.
At the end of this work, he basically summarizes the entire narrative of the Lord of the Rings in just a few paragraphs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the discussion. Thank you all for listening. We hope that you enjoyed it. And if you have anything you'd like to add, feel free to reach out to us privately or to post something or whatever. Until next time. Thank you.